Yeah, rainy Thursday here
Yeah.
in Honolulu.
Do you say rainy or sunny?
Yeah,
Oh,
it's been pouring rain.
is it a seasonal thing? Like, are you in the middle of a monsoon like thing?
It's like the end of rainy season here. I had ambitions to go surfing yesterday, but it was like just crazy. The ocean was churning and that was
Hmm.
intense.
Is there a lot of flooding at this point?
There was a lot of flooding a couple of weeks ago. It like made CNN. It's pretty bad.
Yeah, I saw some. I don't know if it was old footage or new or recent, but I saw some recent footage of flooding, and I was worried that maybe you know the islands might be in peril. Oh, here's Gabby.
Oh, nice.
Welcome, welcome. I think she's still getting connected.
Yeah. Also, we have some people here, which is exciting.
Yeah.
Just if anyone wants to ask a question, just be on Chrome desktop and pop your question in chat. We'll get you up. Hey, Gaby.
Hey, Gabby.
Hello. How are you both? Good to see you.
Great. Good to see you too. How's it going?
It's going well. I've been looking forward to this. I'm so excited to be here. I'm exploring everyone who's in the audience right now, so it's fun.
Yeah, totally. Yeah, we chatted a while ago. Highlighter has gone through some iterations since then.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, the very first time we spoke was from the Secrets of Sand Hill Road book club.
Yeah.
So yeah, it's been a while, which is awesome.
Oh yeah, that was ages. Must have been 9 months or so? That was a long time ago.
Something, yeah. My concept of time now is messed up. Something like that. It's crazy.
That's wild. Did you did you keep doing any sort of like Telegram reading group stuff after that?
Yeah, we had a couple meetings. I think it was a tough book to discuss with people from so many different backgrounds. There were some really interesting conversations, but it ended up mostly being like independent. People found their own small groups, and so
yeah.
Or maybe I'm just not a great facilitator, but it went well for my first time.
That's awesome. I mean, sorry, go ahead.
Were you hosting mostly like on chat or like on Zoom, or what was sort of the format that you were trying out?
It was almost entirely asynchronous and like pretty quiet too, because it was, as you both know, obviously difficult to have those asynchronous discussions, and it was hard to tell when you should be starting a new thread or commenting on someone else's ideas, or kind of how you move from one idea to the next. But then every third of the book, we would meet synchronously and talk through it. So the idea was people would come with questions and we would kind of talk about high level topics.
Mm-hmm.
But then invariably it would kind of devolve into like, there's one thing that someone really wants to talk about, and that would end up being the conversation for the day, which is still great. I learned a lot, and it was cool just to see how different people take entirely different like messages away from the book.
Yeah, totally. I feel like that was the very beginning of when a lot of people started talking about, like how are people finding their people on the internet? Like, is it these Telegram groups? Is it, I don't know, some Discord server? Like, we've talked about that theme a lot, or physical houses like Hype House or Lunch House or some of these things, and OnDeck. So that was actually something I was curious to get your thoughts on, sort of the evolving nature of how people are connecting with people in different subcultures, sub-niches, online and also offline, and how has that manifested for you over the last, like, say, 6 to 9 months?
Yeah, so I guess first context, I am joining an upcoming OnDeck cohort called OnDeck Catalyst, which I'm so excited about and so grateful for. And basically it's for young people who are early on in their career, and kind of like, how do you optimize that starting point? And so I'm kind of bringing my own perspective as like a young investor starting my career in venture, but there are people in all different industries around my age group who are going to be joining. And so I'm sure we'll have a lot of common threads, even though we're doing different things in our day jobs. And then outside of OnDeck, I'm actually living in Launch House right now, which I'm not sure if either of you knew.
You might be from Twitter, but I wanted to hear more about it for sure.
I haven't been like super outspoken about it. I'm definitely not hiding it, but here you can get a sneak peek of the living room I'm in. It's fun.
Was that a grand piano over on the side there?
There is. So that used to be my old seat before I moved to have this white background because I was just literally getting too many questions. I would like talk to a founder and they're like, wow, do you play piano? And I'm like, technically, yeah, I play piano, but it's not really mine. And then they're like, well, where are you? And then I have to go into the whole explanation.
And it's a rabbit hole.
Yeah. So now I have my white background in my corner, but I'm staying at Launch House. And so I've been thinking a lot about like this whole community space as a whole and kind of like where we're moving. And so it's interesting. And I'm excited also just like selfishly to be a part of OnDeck to see what I like about their model versus the Launch House model. Because they're similar and different and maybe like competitive in a way where they have the same high level mission, but also not competitive in that the crossover between people who do OnDeck and do Launch House is very similar. And so like the more the merrier, I think.
Launch I don't know as much about Launch House. Is it mostly like a maker mansion type thing or?
A bit. So I can explain that one better because I've actually done it and I haven't started OnDeck yet. So I don't know it super well, but Launch House started, I think in October of 2020, where a couple founders who knew each other from internet circles decided like what would happen if we all put a bunch of founders in a house together. And it was kind of at the peak of people feeling really isolated from COVID, and they got a big place in Tulum. And I think just invited a lot of like their internet friends to come and stay. And it was an interesting experiment just seeing what that bottoms up organization and like a bottoms up community looks like, of people kind of self-organize and find groups and, get to know each other in a really intimate way. And so they kind of decided like, let's keep trying this out and see where it goes. And now it's a startup in itself. Like Launch House is very much a business, and you can think of it as living in the house as sort of an onboarding or an on-ramp to this larger digital fellowship of people who have been through this experience before. So it's very out there. And so I totally understand if people have hesitations about it. I had a ton of hesitations before I came. I didn't want to come. And they basically said like, come for 2 weeks. I was like, that's too much for me. They said, come for a week. I was like, that's too much. They're like, come for literally a day. Because Launch House right now is in LA and I live in Santa Barbara. So they're like, literally stop by for a day, like get tested, make sure you don't have COVID, and then just come see what it's like. And they were saying to me, like, anybody who comes ends up staying. And I was like, yeah, but like, you haven't met me yet. Like, I'm way too busy for something like this. Like, I take too many phone calls to be in a co-working space like this. Like, I feel like I have sort of like an internet personality, and I was nervous to have people see me in real life, or I don't know, see someone who follows me on Twitter, like all of a sudden they'll see me walking around the house in sweatpants. I wasn't ready for that. But I showed up for a day, and like obviously they were right. I've been here for over a month now.
Wow.
And so normally say it again.
What was the magic? Like, what did you feel on that first day?
The community is really, really special. So they really intentionally curate the people here. And so it's a really interesting mix of founders and creatives and a couple token investors like myself, mostly consumer founders. And so people are all kind of interested in the same like high level thoughts of how do users interact with the product and interact with each other on the product. And all just very interested in building and learning new things. And so it's a cool experiment of kind of like what happens when you nucleate all of those people together in one room. It's also interesting for me because I started my career online. So I didn't really know what it was like to meet people like in person. Yeah. Like, all I knew was a Zoom pitch, you know what I mean? And so now to be able to see the entirety of a person, it's not that crazy, but it's like such a great experience for me. And so I've been able to form just like some really, really special connections here. And I'm not doing it for my job, but I also feel like it's benefited me in my job because I think I have a lot more empathy for founders now. A lot of them are fundraising here, and I can see when they're happy, when they're stressed out, what parts of the process are particularly challenging for them. So I'm kind of taking mental notes on how to be more founder friendly. But I do think living with a bunch of founders is a good place to start. So it's been a lot of fun.
Yeah.
And are there certain, you said they're kind of very consumer focused on their stuff. Are they mostly pre-launch, or are there certain kind of new areas or ideas that kind of living in a group like this has turned you on to, or kind of made you aware might be worth poking around or kind of make more interesting to you?
Yeah, I've been interested in like the crypto space and NFTs and this concept of like digital ownership for a while, but that's
Mhm.
definitely popular here. I would say maybe not the majority, but there's a handful of people who are in the ideation phase or pre-launch. And I think what's special about Launch House is they say that when you're here, you're biased to launch. And so maybe in some other situations, you'll be kind of sitting on an idea or really philosophizing about it, or, you know, you don't want to put it out into the world until it's perfect. But at Launch House, the whole thesis of living here is like you are going to launch something, right? Like something is going to come out of this and it's going to be shared with the world, and that's a net positive. So I know one example, the cohort before I joined, the founders of Wombo.ai were at Launch House, which is basically like a social lip syncing, similar like a deep fake almost, like a inherently viral, just like funny lip syncing product. And they'd been sitting on it for a while. They had like worked in AI for a while. Like they had this technology and this product. And I don't know why they weren't putting it out, but they weren't putting it out. And basically, once they left Launch House, they decided their go-to-market was like, we're finally going to send this out. Let's send it to 50 friends and see what happens. So they sent it to 50 friends, and within 2 weeks, the product had 2 million users, which is just
Wow.
crazy, crazy. And it was cool because now
Wombo.ai.
Yeah, let's see if I can find the link. And
Okay, I got a link. I got it. There we
Oh
go.
wow, this is awesome.
Yeah, so
AI-powered lip syncing. No pitch, no problem.
It just was crazy. Yeah, so it was super, super cool. And it's cool because Launch House also has, like I said, the digital component. And so they had left Launch House, but, you know, all this great news happened and everyone was celebrating with them. They were saying, like, how do you get more AWS credits? Like, we need help. And everyone's pitching in to help. Even when people have launch days here, like, let's say they're launching on Product Hunt, everyone gathers around, there's champagne. Like, it's such a supportive environment, so collaborative. Yeah, it's been fun. Like, obviously, I like to read and write a lot, and a lot of people who I am hoping to write some fun pieces with before I leave. And yeah, it's been a really, really cool experience.
Yeah, what if some of those like collab ideas, what are some of the things you're thinking about in terms of like what you might want to explore with others, or what's the organic kind of nature of that been like for you?
Yeah, so definitely everyone kind of comes in with their own angle of like why they're at Launch House, like what's their intention for being here, and then also what are the general things they're interested in. And I think I've kind of honed in that something I've been exploring for a while, and I just didn't really know how to verbalize it, was what is the future of the creator economy? And so we're still in just such a nascent stage of the creator economy. We're not even close to its peak, but I'm already thinking like what comes next, right? When we have a world where creators are their own brands and everyone is a creator and people are making money from side hustles, etc. Like that is a thing, and what comes next. And so I've been able to think of two so far, and I think I will develop more as I go on. And so I want to be able to have like a little series of how I'm thinking about it. One of them, which I've touched on a little bit already, is this idea of curation, where we have more creators, which is great. But in unintended consequences, we have a lot of noise on the internet, basically. Like internet pollution is what a friend of mine called it yesterday.
Yeah, it's a good term.
And so, yeah, like what do you do with all of that noise on the internet? And particularly as a consumer, how do you sort through all of that? So I think it'll be through people who are expert curators and people who you pay who have good taste to help you sort through the noise. I met a founder yesterday. The other benefit of staying in a house like this is now you kind of get to meet these people in person finally. And so I met a founder yesterday, the founder of Basic Space. I believe it's just basic.space. Basically curating artists and people who create clothing and just like people who have good taste in style, quite literally. And so this is the place you can go to find those curated collections. And so that's one example of like what that curation might look like. I've also been meeting with a lot of founders who are like, how do you curate the things that you find on the web? And like, what does your digital self look like? And how do you give yourself a holistic view of that? So even like I was saying before I came to Launch House, it's weird because here they see the holistic view of me. But on the internet, it's like, it's so fragmented. It's like me on Twitter, me on LinkedIn, me on Instagram. They're all different people. And so how do we create an internet or like a digital personality where we do have that more holistic view? And so meeting founders who are kind of building in that space. So anyway,
when I look at basic.space, it looks like it is very focused on people who would be exclusively curators. And there's also, I think, this idea that a lot of times people who are creators or would be creators get their start in curation, or sometimes vice versa. So I wonder if you sort of have much sort of developed around, will the creators of today become also the curators of the future? Or do you think that there's just a whole separate class, maybe around e-commerce would be a natural place where you have a lot of curation that doesn't involve the same direct creation? But in media, there's maybe more crossover, kind of two-way doors there.
Yeah, it's tough because in some senses, the bar for curation is low. So you have a lot of people who are curating like what newsletters they like to read or their favorite articles or whatever. And the bar to do that is not so high. And so that's what gets me nervous about my own thesis is like, if anything, that just adds more noise to the internet. Is all these people compiling these other lists, and now we have this like meta layer, and then it's like curation all the way down. Like it never ends. But then on the other side, and when I was talking with the Basic Space founder yesterday, there are some areas where really like it takes talent and it takes something that is worth paying for to be able to do this kind of curation. And so he was telling me about all of those pages on Instagram of like 90s style or something like that, and some of these pages are so well curated, and then you meet the people behind those pages, and they're nothing like what you would imagine.
Really?
Because if anything, they're just really good listeners. So when you're a creator, it's more about like you are the brand, and who are you, and what is your personality. But if you're a curator, it's really like what taste do you have, and so I think that's special. The thesis is so broad, and so there's so many examples of it. I haven't figured out if I'm going to come up with like one thing that I'm looking for, but I'm just interested in it at a high level.
Yeah.
We were talking yesterday about the concept of curation as it applies to kind of a stub for content creation and for audience building that could end up becoming, really far afield, businesses. So the example I think we were talking is A24, the film studio or publisher. You could imagine that type of thing is like a certain mix of audience and taste and some financing. And if you wanted to today, you could probably start something like a Substack where you curate indie films or films that would be, most interesting to a certain audience, and you're giving your own taste, stamp of approval, a little bit of synopsis or summary, and you end up building an audience for that kind of content, which then may give you access to people making those films or financing for those films or helping participate in financing for those films. So it almost seems like there's things in just like curation that could become a nice layer to kind of expand around. It basically becomes a hub of audience, then you can expand around whatever makes sense as a business. Maybe in the commerce example, you actually end up someday producing your own commerce store, and you actually already have an audience assembled around that taste, but you didn't have to start the store to begin with.
Yeah, I agree. It reminds me of this other company called Colors. It's a studio for artists, and so they started out in the way that you mentioned, where they're just curating artists who are already producing music, on their own path. But if they fit the Colors kind of vibe and taste, then they're invited to come perform through Colors, and so they're kind of incubated where they can record in their studio, where it's like you have the colorful background, it's like the solo microphone hanging down, it's the same style every time, and then the artist gets to sing whatever their song is, and then kind of like you mentioned also, it allows them to move horizontally from that. And so they started out just curating, having them perform, and now they have their own concerts, they have their own Colors merch. And so people will not just buy the merch of the fan of the artist they like, but they'll buy the merch of Colors as a studio, and subscriptions and their own playlists and things like that. So I'm subscribed to the Colors X Studios playlist on Spotify. I'm not subscribed necessarily to the individual artists. And so that's another good example there. Yeah, it's very interesting.
So their taste is really going to introduce you to new artists over time, which gives them the ability to focus on curation and maybe even seeding new types of creativity that you wouldn't be aware of or that wouldn't be able to break through the noise, but they can do that. I really like this feature you pointed out that in Colors X Studios, the common kind of color background is both like in the brand name, but also it sets an aesthetic while allowing the person to, you know, pop their own self-expression on top of that. So it has a nice mix of like platform and supportive content. I've never seen anything that's quite like that. That's a very nice kind of interface between the curation and the content.
Yeah, I agree. I also see Mark's comment on the side, librarians are underrated. I totally agree. Like even record stores and things like that. And even when I wrote my piece on curation, I can't remember if I included this or not, but I remember reading about a bookstore in Japan, and you walk in and they literally have one book for sale. Like that is the perfect example of curation.
Right.
And so you're coming to the bookstore, you're not necessarily coming for the book. And so, yeah, certainly this has been around for forever, but I'm now starting to finally verbalize it. So it's cool to like kind of find it all over the place.
Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. And then I guess back to what I was saying, like future of the creator economy. That's one of them, and we could talk about it for days. And then the other one I'm thinking about is we're creating tools now to support the creator. I think what's going to come next is we're going to create tools to support the fan, because creators are great and they produce incredible content, and they're running businesses now. They're co-founders of companies, even though it doesn't always work out, as we've seen in the last couple of weeks. And creators have immense power, but at the end of the day, what are creators without their fans? And so eventually we're going to have to reach a point where fans are finally getting recognized for the work they do and bringing up those people and supporting them, particularly when they bet on them early. So now a good example of that is NFTs and just the crypto ecosystem in general, and like having a stake in people and their work, and being able to kind of reap the benefits of that as everyone wins. But I think even beyond that, there's a lot of interesting examples. So there's one company that I've been fascinated by for a while called Scout. I don't know if there's anything on the website. It leaves, I guess you can go wild with your imagination. But basically, like one of the theses behind it is very similar to what I was saying, where you should be able to be rewarded for being a scout in your own right. And we all are in some sense. Even Spotify has kind of productized it already as a good proof point. Like they'll say you're a day one listener of Kanye West or something, and that's something that you'll share with your friends. You'll say, I liked this person before you did, and that's something of value. But then how do you actually create that in a sense that you can share with others? Another good example is Stir, the financial services tool for creators, did a drop called Pre-Subscribe, where you can literally pre-subscribe to people and share that publicly. So you can say like,
oh, that's cool.
DK and Mishti, I love what you're doing with Highlighter, and so I'm going to pre-subscribe to you guys and pay you $10 a month just to publicly show my support. And if anything, it's more about that public show of support than the money you're giving anyway. But now through pre-subscribe, you can have almost like a wall of these are the people that I support and these are the causes that I care about. And so that's another good example of it as well.
Yeah. It also reminds me a little bit, have you played around with BitClout at all?
Yeah, so I ended up on BitClout, but before I knew what it was, I literally got a text from my friend saying, hey, Gaby, are you on BitClout? And I was like, oh, no, should I know about it? Like something for work or something? And they're like, no, but you're worth $500 or something. I was like, okay, I guess I'll make an account. Yeah, it's interesting. It's interesting because the currency on BitClout is locked on the platform.
Right.
So I, with some of the crypto nerds in this house, I've been trying to understand like what that means. And I was trying to come up with a definition of liquidity that would make sense for someone like me, where like, to me, liquidity feels like the ability to cash out and like put it in your bank account. Right. But I think in the terms of these platforms, liquidity is more the ability to trade within the ecosystem. And I have to think of that ecosystem as something separate from everything else. I'm not sure if I'm thinking about it correctly. So I guess if anybody understands it better in the comments, please share your thoughts. But yeah, I think I have tokens that have some value on the BitClout ecosystem, but they can't go anywhere. So I'm still trying to figure out like what value do they have.
I suspect that it is just early to express that value because it is kind of a one-way door right now. So I'd suspect that over time it becomes more two-way. But the core idea that you were talking about of being able to allocate $10 early and as a show of support, and you have it time stamped. And I think all the mechanics between the BitClout currency and the creator coins, there's a lot of controversy around it. So, I think there's something in this flavor of things that is, at least I'm spending time and paying attention to. I don't know if the mechanics here are all perfectly identified here, but the idea that like you could express an intention about something about your taste making, and you can actually also participate somehow monetarily in the gain. It's almost like owning shares, or it's like a equity crowdfunding of a person. And the mechanics, the analogies are not perfect. I think it's like this new enough space that we're still kind of poking around in the dark. But something about it feels like something like this should work at some point.
Yeah, I agree. I do think it's an element of just needing people to be on the platform and creating those network effects before the currency can have some kind of value. And so like we're still in that process of getting people on it.
Yeah. I was actually also curious to ask what kind of interesting things you've been seeing. One of the things you mentioned was founders who are working on more holistic ways of expressing yourself online. And to me, the two ideas are pretty connected because we've been talking a lot about like these link in bio websites like Beacons or Linktree. And what one promise they have is that they could become really powerful like curation layers for individuals, obviously. But yeah, what's been interesting to you there that like goes beyond kind of the silos of Twitter, Instagram, LinkedIn for different like modes of your life that you talked about?
Yeah, sure. So the link in bio companies are all super interesting. And I just think the idea of having a digital home is really valuable. My struggle with all of them is it feels so static. And like it's difficult for me to update it every time a piece of me changes, if that makes sense. So something that is definitely a step in the right direction, and I've been having a lot of fun exploring. The founder was also in Launch House. And so this was a founder I met on Zoom some months ago and then got to live with him for a month, which was super fun. It's called alias.co. It used to be called Wait Who Is, if you had seen it earlier, and they just went through a rebrand. But basically, it's almost like an RSS for people. And so as someone who's on the site, I don't really have to do anything. I can write my bio if I want, but it's updated live with the things that I post on the internet all over. And so, for example, like I don't have a podcast of my own, but I've spoken on them before. And those podcasts that I participated on are now on my alias account, or any of my tweets or anything I write, or if I'm mentioned in something that will end up there. And so it's updated live, like as I interact with people on the internet. And so I love that. And
you didn't have to do anything. It just, they did all the connections of what's your Twitter, what's your blog, what's your...
Yeah, it's still in the early stages. So a lot of it is still manual of like, they had an artist draw my face, which was cool. And they had me write the bio, and I think that was it, but everything else was scraped from the internet. And so I didn't touch it. I continue to not touch it, but if I had to give one link, I would give that over a Beacons or a Linktree.
Interesting.
Right.
Yeah.
So I think that's probably the most direct answer, and I really like that one. And I think we're going to need something like this going forward. This feels like a better Wikipedia too for people. But then in general, like the holistic view of people, I'm super excited about this because I had one of them that I was going to talk about. And then the second one that I want to talk about now, I met him this morning. And I had no idea what he was working on. He just wanted like pitch practice, and he ran through the pitch, just asking for feedback. And I was like, I hope you understand, this is what I am most excited about in the world. And I was like freaking out with him. But basically the first one is the first investment I made at Bessemer called Pager. So it's pager.xyz. I think it's fascinating. The story behind it is I met the founder back in June. I was still at my previous fund, Chapter One. And I met with him to do user research, and it literally like was one of the few companies that has just kept me up at night since we first met. And I could not get it out of my head. I kept meeting with him. We kept working through stuff. I was trying to help him get connected to other people. And it hit this period where I was connecting him with other investors as he was thinking about raising his first round of funding. And then I was like, wait a minute, like that's not my job. If I like him so much, I want a part of this. But it was so early. It's a consumer social startup. It's pre-launch, so early. It's a solo founder. And I was getting in my own head of like, there's no way this would ever work. And so basically I told my partner about it, and I literally was like, humor me on this. I'm not sure. I can't get it out of my head. It's keeping me up at night, how excited I am about this. I didn't think it was going to be a Bessemer investment, but it literally took one meeting and my partner fell in love with it just like I did. And so I feel so lucky that I get to actually work with him now.
That's so cool.
That was just a funny experience personally, because I feel like so much of, because I'm so early in my career, like so much of what I've done has been meeting cool founders and then helping them get to this stage of fundraising when they're really in the early stages of their company. And then I finally got to experience, okay, now I've done it. Now I just get to work with you. And it's amazing. So anyway, Pager is all about creating a better way to share your screenshots. And so if you open up the Photos app on your phone, you have live photos, portraits, selfies, photos from Instagram, photos of your dog, photos from a trip to a certain location. And then you have all of your screenshots in one place, and they're super hard to sort through. And it doesn't make sense because we take screenshots very intentionally. It's such a binary action. You either scroll past something or the Snapchat disappears or whatever, and you lose it forever, or you take a screenshot and you save it. So if it's so intentional, there should be a better way of sorting through them and resurfacing them and sharing them with your friends and annotating them and all of these things.
Yeah.
So that's what Pager is trying to do, is basically build a better screenshot. And so kind of his approach to it is screenshots are the portals to our digital lives. We screenshot songs we like, we screenshot funny Snapchats from our friends, we screenshot text conversations, we screenshot articles we read. That's probably the biggest percentage of my own screenshots. And they tell so much about a person. And so if we can create a better way to showcase them, not only is that a form of curation if we can publicize it, but it also helps us share like a more holistic view of ourselves.
That's right. I love it.
Yeah, I'm a huge fan. It's still pre-launch, so he's working through it, but I'm excited for it. And then the other one that, like I said, I met this morning and I'm so excited about, and turns out he had met Alex, the founder of Pager. So I was like, good, because you guys absolutely need to meet. He's basically building, he's calling it like Twitch for the rest of the internet. So there's a general trend across all platforms where we're moving from desktop to mobile first. So we're moving from, you can think of so many examples, but like, for example, like video creation and then like moving that to TikTok, or like image sharing and processing and editing, moving that to Instagram, etc. And what is that for Twitch? The majority of Twitch users use desktop first, and mobile is like not really utilized. And if you think about live streams nowadays and how people live stream with their fans, if they are using mobile first, it's them holding up their phone and squinting at the camera and trying to read the comments. And it's this like weird stream of consciousness, and there's no narrative to talk about. So that's why Twitch works, is because you're live streaming on your computer, and oftentimes you're streaming a game. And so there's some sort of narrative or story you can tell. And then you can layer your own personality on top of that. So the most successful Twitch streamers, it's not them gaming in silence, but it's them gaming and also talking in the background. But then live streaming on your phone is like the stupid Instagram lives where it's like you're just staring at the comments. So what is a better version of that? What does it look like? And it would be like Twitch for everything else. And so you can live stream basically anything on the web. So like some use cases that we were just riffing on in our call, you could have like a funny influencer. I don't know if you guys have been in the Shoot Your Shot room on Clubhouse, but we were imagining one of the Shoot Your Shot girls could be live streaming, like swiping through Tinder or something like that. And you can like live stream with your fans talking through it, which would be funny. I don't know if I'm endorsing that, but I think it would be funny. I would probably watch. Or if you are a fashion influencer, you can be live streaming, like, what does it look like when you go online shopping? What items are you buying? And then I can do picture in picture as a viewer, and I can buy along with them the ones that I want. Or you can be live streaming trades you're making on Robinhood and see if people want to join you. And so there's so many opportunities there of like what you can be sharing on the web. And it's similar of the content you engage with online is like a portal to who you are. So it doesn't make sense that we don't have ways to share that right now. So
yeah,
those are my top 3 right now. But if anybody else is really building cool in that space, please tell me.
I just have the urge to meld all of them. Like, I just want a Gaby Goldberg page where if you're actually, DK and I were talking about this yesterday. Like, what if you were browsing the internet? And DK built like a funny, janky version of this a while ago. He was telling us, but like, imagine I was browsing Chrome and I could sort of like turn my live view on, and then anyone who wants to follow along with what I'm doing could see what I was Googling. And like, what was that company that we talked about yesterday that would like
Beam, right? Have you played with Beam at all? They're kind of in a...
I haven't.
It like curates notes and links out of your browsing activity. So if you're doing a deep dive on like space or something, and you end up with this like mushroom cloud of links that come out of that, I think it's a less intentional. A lot of people use Roam for like note taking when they know exactly what they want to save, but this sort of like takes ambient activity and puts it into notes.
Yeah, cool. It's like Justin TV for the internet. It's like if Justin TV was created today.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, very cool.
My sense on Beam, and I haven't actually played with it yet, but my sense of what it's doing is it's a combination between like the multiplayer mode of Roam with the web browser, so that when you initiate a search, you're telling the tool, this is the context, this is what I'm trying to solve, this is what's on my mind. And then all of the clicks and websites you visit, images you look at, videos you watch, become part of what helps you form a picture, a solution of that. And so, my understanding is it's like you search and then you curate from the results, and that becomes like your little notebook of your answers to that result. Now, I don't know if it's more done in public or more done in private. So I don't, until I've used the product, it's hard for me to actually comment, but that's at least from some of the reading I've been doing on it. Looks like an interesting tool that I'd love to play with.
Yeah, I love that. I'm definitely going to try it out. And it reminds me of what the founder of what I was just talking about told me this morning, where he kind of articulated my problem with the internet right now. Is like I have my different selves on all these platforms. Mm-hmm. And he said the home screen is the solution to that. And your home screen, if you have a way to share that, is the holistic view of you. But Beam also seems to be that as well, where it's kind of like a passive collection of what you consume. Or similarly, I don't know if you remember the thing that went viral on Twitter like a month or two ago called Vicariously, where you could create a list.
All those lists.
Yeah, it was kind of like a really annoying growth hack. But
I got looped into these. Okay.
Yeah, you could create a list of someone you really like, who they follow. And so instead of just seeing the content that they put out, you could see the content that they were consuming. Mm-hmm. Because you have some people who tweet all the time, and then some people who never tweet, but they definitely read. They're like refreshing their Twitter and reading stuff. And so it's valuable to be able to see what they consume. So a similar kind of value proposition, but
right. It also seems like one of the problems that I think has always been a common problem in Twitter is that it takes so much work to figure out who to follow. And with something like Vicariously, in that vein of thinking, it's like one person can do the work of like curating, and then you can draft off of their curation. So if I'm like, I think that Gaby knows a lot about interesting tech stuff, then I could just, see the world through your eyes. And I think that idea probably should exist in more places. And today we have all these like detailed follow graphs, and we're like, everybody has to recurate everything else. Whereas if we can just create hierarchies of curation and trust in different ways, I think there's like different network structures that could emerge to make the internet better, make our browsing experience better. There's one that Mark from the comments mentioned. He said Google search somehow acts as a curator for the whole internet. We all know how hard it is to find specific information. yeah, I think ultimately this curation, all of these curation things are ultimately like new approaches to search, which I think is an exciting idea that I don't think we hear a lot of people talk about the way that curation impacts search. And it's really, it's a few steps down the road, but it's one of the things that I get excited about because I think that the existing kind of search ecosystem is kind of highly optimized, but therefore not that wild and not that organic anymore. Like even the things we, would have called organic 15, 20 years ago are pretty optimized, and everybody's got their SEO playbooks and everything's kind of like, playbooked and optimized, not very wild. So we've talked before, the more wild we can make it, the better, the more organic, the more we actually have like people involved in faces and humans. So excited about that.
Yeah, definitely. I agree. I'm reading the comments on the side of kind of like the good and bad of this aspect on the internet of like a con of it is it feels voyeuristic, but then a pro is what you were talking about where it leans into kind of the authenticity. And this is something that you can't really fake is like what content do you care about and what do you interact with online? So yeah, it's tough. It's a balance.
Yeah, definitely. And I mean, one thing I was saying is that the critical part of this is also knowing how to find curators, right? So like the meta level, I mean, once everyone is curating, who do you actually, like, what are your people networks of those that you trust and where do those come from? And so that maybe like full circle, sort of coming back to Launch House or OnDeck Fellowship, all these different OnDeck fellowships, maybe the one that you're in, being a vein for that in the future. Or I mean, it's a very human thing, right? Like we're always trying to find our people. That's a very natural thing we do every day. And I'm kind of interested in how that continues to evolve online.
Definitely. Yeah, it's interesting how it evolves online because so much about finding your people in real life is like some sort of shared experience that you have. So Launch House works because whether I'm living with them now or they have lived in a cohort previously, we all understand what this experience is like. And we understand that people who have not been through that experience don't understand it to the same degree. And that's what bonds us all together. So I will be curious to see if I feel that the same or more or less through a purely digital fellowship with OnDeck.
Yeah. What were your thoughts? What have your thoughts been like looking at OnDeck over the last few months? Sort of like mushrooming, amazing kind of growth of different programs and people and things coming out of there. So, as sort of an outsider, what were you thinking? And now, what's your mindset going in?
Yeah, it's a good question. There's a lot of them. So I think the conversation about reverse network effects is really interesting, where, and Eric Tornberg has talked about this openly. It's like not a secret by any means, but it's this idea that as more people join the network, it actually becomes less valuable. And so OnDeck really did used to be a very exclusive ecosystem. And it's still exclusive to some degree, but definitely less so. And so you're kind of having this tough balance of like, if you compare it to a university like Stanford or Harvard or something like that, it keeps that exclusivity, which is like good and bad for the obvious reasons. But that hasn't really changed over time. And OnDeck is going through this period of like massive scale. And I feel like everyone I know in tech has done an OnDeck fellowship or probably has done it or will do it. So it's no surprise that I'm doing it now. I knew I would do it at some point. So it'll be interesting to see like if participants like views towards other OnDeck fellows is as high quality as it used to be. It's similar to kind of what YC has gone through as well with expanding the batch sizes so much. So that's one thing I'm thinking about. I think in general
on that, we've actually talked about that a bunch in terms of even like physical brands today, whether it's like luxury goods or like Ivy League institutions, for example. How do you, for something like OnDeck, how do you think that they can keep that kind of esteem bar high enough for it to be like a high quality signal as I guess a lot of these are different verticals as well. So maybe the more specialized you get, like you can have different areas where you have like the best of the best. Yeah, I don't know. What would you be thinking about if you were approaching this problem from their perspective.
Yeah, I think the comment that's at the top of the discussion right now is definitely a good point. Like the best way to create that good work is or the best way to create a positive signal is to do good work. I feel like even that's something I think about like in my own career is I have like a public facing aspect of myself that is very much not correlated to how well I actually do my job. Like content I create, and if I'm online and if a certain amount of people are following me, like that's all great, but that means very little in terms of if I'm actually doing my job well and showing up and putting in good work. And so I always remind myself of that. Like there are lots of these other signals that can be interpreted in a million different ways, but the important thing is to do good work. And so I think that can also be applied here. I'll be curious to see, and I'm optimistically think that through OnDeck, the sum of those communities is greater than the individual parts. I actually don't know what to expect or what kind of the community will look like once I join. But if it can produce something that's greater than what I could have done on my own, then like that's a great thing. And the more people who can share in that is great. And perhaps with YC becoming larger too, maybe it's just like a larger shift that exclusivity is less important now, and there are other ways to create that sense of credibility.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, because I guess we're seeing it in lots of different places now. Things like Lambda School too.
I mean, the exclusivity inclusivity debate. I think we have sort of a we probably have like our assumptions are rooted in some of the physical world institutions that we've seen grow, and I think one of the pieces that the internet is really good at is helping to sort and connect people. And so, if you look at like YC operating at today's scale, I think probably serves founders better than the very first cohort because they didn't have as many investors around, they didn't have as much help, they didn't have people they could sell to. So I think the core is, not to say it's not about lowering the bar, but it's sort of keeping a quality bar, but using kind of technology to help people sort and filter into the places where they're going to have a good experience. I think if you took a famous institution and jammed 1 million people in there, it'd probably just be chaos, kind of historically. But I think online, if you have nice guardrails to like usher people into the right spaces to connect with each other properly, and then there's kind of cross space kind of network effects and kind of value that you get. I think you actually can have the best of both worlds, but it might actually take technology and tooling to help with that ushering and sorting, because I think we don't naturally have that. We don't exactly know how it works. We know that like the Twitter style of that sorting doesn't really work that well, or doesn't always work the way we'd hope. But maybe something in the way, aggregation and Slack spaces or other types of rooms that exist online today. I wonder if there are ways that we can take those and build better like sorting functions into those. If we have good sorting functions, then you still get you get the value of larger networks while getting some of the intimacy of smaller networks and keeping the curation bar, quite high.
Yeah. I invited a bunch of people up with good comments. Nitin, chime in here. I love your point on the one that Gaby mentioned, but also this ASU point.
I'm new to this platform. Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Cool. Well, what I was mentioning about Arizona State is, at one point, so I'm from Tempe, Arizona, and at one point I was very proud of the exclusivity that institutions like Penn, Stanford, Harvard, etc. afforded, until I realized like why that was the case. And it was the case because it made me feel good about myself, right? Like, oh, I am being granted admittance into this exclusive club of individuals. And I actually felt the same way about OnDeck. And then as OnDeck grew, I had this other feeling, which is like, oh, like, do I like that it's growing? Do I like that the network is growing? And I realized what that actually was a shift in the value of the community as a signaling mechanism towards something else. And what I really appreciate about networks like OnDeck, also Arizona State University, is when you have an institution where the governing principle is one of inclusivity, the value of the institution becomes less about the signal that the institution provides, but more about what you do within that institution. And it was a helpful reframing of my perspective of how to engage with the institution, how to engage with those as a part of it. And honestly, it's been more productive.
Yeah. Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. I'm also getting Nadia up because I know we've been talking about this a lot, and Renko has been talking about this a lot, a community of kind of generalists in tech that we're in terms of, I think we're also realizing that the best, oh, did we lose Nadia?
Oops, sorry. I was
There she
chuckling.
Over here.
Yeah,
Hey.
but the best feeling and also like the best curation within a community is when people start finding other people to co-create with. Like Gaby was just talking about this as well, finding people to jam with on future blog pieces or whatever it might be. So that as both like the best value add for someone who's in the community, and then also very organic, natural PR for the community once that stuff gets put out into the world. And Nadia's in the South Park Commons Fellowship, which is very new. So definitely curious to hear how you're thinking about this too.
Yeah, it's interesting. I feel like I'm almost like an early adopter sometimes for like more curated communities. And I think like Nathan, similar to what you're thinking about of like what attracts me to those, like I think there's something around just like being confident in the quality of connections, but also having it feel like small and intimate enough that I'm sort of comfortable being vulnerable and engaging. And I think like it's sort of, this is an interesting point. I mean, there's OnDeck, there's Reforge, like sort of have YC as like a more mature example where there are a lot of really exciting new ways, sort of in contrast to your like Penns and Harvards, to be able to meet people and learn. And I think it's both like the network, but also, you know, what you're thinking about and learning. And I think the question of like, how do you maintain that value as you grow? And you know, can you even like increase it versus like, how do you manage, you know, that quality at scale? Like, I think, I don't know, it's super interesting to me. I think it's super challenging. Like, I think for me, like I'm very passionate about like women in tech, and I'm in a lot of these like big Facebook groups for that. And a lot of times, to be really honest, like I feel like at sort of mass scale, like the quality, even though you have to sort of fill out an application and join, you know, it's lightweight, but it sort of fails. And so I think, you know, Jen and I have talked a lot about this. I see her in the chat, and I think SPC is also thinking about this sort of in their own way. But how do you maintain or even like improve upon that quality as you scale, I think is really interesting. And Gaby, like so much of what you've shared about OnDeck, like it makes so much sense. And I'm excited to hear like, you know, how do you, in sort of like your dream world, imagine it evolving? Are you going to sort of maintain connection as an alumni? Like, what do you see it becoming?
Yeah, both of the framings that you both offered are so helpful, Nadia and Nitin. I think I actually realize now after hearing you both speak, the reason that Launch House has been so impactful for me is because it has been the only place in tech where I can be so vulnerable about the things I like and don't like and struggle with in my career. And I already know, sorry, Nitin, I already know going in to OnDeck that it's not going to be something where I can be so vulnerable, just because of the sheer size of my cohort, and things that, like, for lack of a better way to put it, like things that I want people to know about me. So that can't happen everywhere. And I'm not expecting it to. And I understand that OnDeck is going to be able to have a utility that I don't get from other networks. But that is why I find Launch House so special, and probably the way you feel about SPC, Nadia, and things like that. It's just rare and special to be able to have that kind of vulnerability with people who have also opted into that experience. So, like, for example, the only person before Launch House that I could complain to about work was my mom. And she has no idea what I do for work. But she was the only person who would kind of understand what I was going through or how I was feeling. And I felt comfortable being so vulnerable with her. And this is the first time I found a community of people who actually get it and I can also be vulnerable with. And so that's a special thing.
Yeah. And I think like to Mishti's point too of co-creating, and I think Mishti and Jen have seen a lot of this for me personally, but I think there's something like exactly to what you're saying, Gabby, of being able to like be vulnerable, but also like share when you're developing and like when you're trying to like learn and grow. Like I think about like when I write and I share something for feedback in Renco Slack, like people are so supportive and I feel much more comfortable sharing like early thinking where I'm like, this could be wrong or terrible or like dumb, but I feel really comfortable like having, you know, those people react. And it's funny, like on the other extreme, like there's like Twitter where I'm trying to tweet more and I consistently have tweets full of typos because I like edit and re-edit and re-edit and re-edit and I'm finally like send it and then I look at it and I'm like, this thing is full of typos. And like it's that process of like being not so comfortable, I think, for me sharing, you know, really how I feel I want to present a certain way because it's such a massive, you know, in my head, it's probably like 2 people, but it's like a massive audience or could be. And so I think there's something about that you've said that like really hits home for me.
Yeah. And to Jen's comment, I'm actually curious, Gabby and Launch House, I mean, you're living together. Are there kind of intentional, when you first moved in or visited, for example, like, what are sort of the rituals that you've noticed going on, like formalized or informal, in order to encourage some of that vulnerability and really like all of the unlocks that come from getting people to be a little more open with each other?
Yeah, definitely. So first, people all arrive on the same weekend, with the exception of a few sort of anchor members. And so I would call myself one of them now because I've bled over from one cohort to the next. And so everyone arrives on the same weekend, but there's a handful of people who are not necessarily in charge, but can tell you where things are in the house and what the culture should be like, etc. And they really set the tone. So that's kind of how it begins. And then the schedule is relatively unstructured just because we all work. And so maybe like 3 times a week, we have evening events and it's very bottoms up. And so maybe the co-founders of the house will organize one of them. And oftentimes we've had co-founders of a startup say literally like roast my startup for an hour and we'll buy you dinner if you roast my startup for me. So we'll do those. We'll do talks about community. We'll do talks about crypto and how to understand it if you don't know anything about it. But then kind of as you both have put so well, they develop, not only is the conversation very authentic, but then everyone's in the same room when it's over and we're all hanging out. And then it's also been fun to see the community kind of self-organize. And so we'll organize family dinners kind of spontaneously and do things like that. And that is when like the really special moments do happen.
Yeah.
I wonder, the Launch House sounds like it's a kind of has pretty good structure to the kind of cohort segment. And I wonder sort of from the timing and kind of, I guess, leadership perspective or kind of culture setting perspective, is that something that you expect is going to be in common with the way OnDeck works, or do you already sort of have visibility into how sort of culture setting, you know, you talk about like anchor members, how that works in like the Catalyst program? Is that same kind of pattern likely to apply, or do you have visibility into that yet?
I don't know. I have a feeling it will be more structured through OnDeck. And also just because it's larger, it's harder to organize a large group of people to like get on a Zoom all at once, etc. Yeah, I'm really not sure, but I have a feeling it will be more structured and it's going to be more kind of like, this is what you can expect to get out of this. I think also an interesting thing is like OnDeck and Launch House both are not free. And so with OnDeck, I feel like you're, and if anybody has like other thoughts here for people who have participated in it, I feel like with OnDeck, you're really paying, like you have a feeling of what you're going to get out of this. And with Launch House, it's almost harder to get yourself over the edge of like, this is something I want to pay for, because it's really like, how do you quantify the cost of a valuable friendship or something like that? Mm-hmm. And that feels fundamentally different from OnDeck. I'm not sure though, because I haven't done it. But I know like for me coming to Launch House, the most difficult thing was like, I don't know if this is worth paying for because I already have friends and I have friends in tech, etc. And I now understand like this is really a priceless experience and it's et cetera, et cetera. But it's not necessarily a utility. You know what I mean? I'm not coming here to source deals or learn how to do my job better. It's like, I'm here to be surrounded by these people.
What is the Launch House business? Is it real estate? Is it venture capital? Is it some sort of other content subscription thing?
The business model in the future, it's still so early. In the future, it's going to be mostly a digital subscription and also a fund in its own right where they can kind of incubate early stage startups and invest in them. A lot of times co-founders have literally met each other here and come up with ideas within Launch House. And so having stake in that would be of value. I think if they do it right, they'll make a slight profit off of the physical residences, but that's not part of the actual business model.
Right. Yeah, makes sense. So it sounds like it's like part like subscription membership club, part venture capital.
Yeah, they described it. Oh, I hope I don't butcher it. They described it like part Soho House for physical residents, part media business. I'm forgetting the analogies. Part like digital fellowship, like OnDeck, I think.
Yeah,
those three prongs. Yeah.
And in the OnDeck universe, my understanding is there's a bunch of different tracks. Do they all happen kind of simultaneously? Like you're in the Catalyst fellowship. Does that have other sibling fellowships that begin and end at the same time but are focused on different content topics?
I'm not sure about the timing, but I do know that repeat behavior is really, really common within OnDeck. So someone who does the OnDeck Founders Fellowship is very likely to do another one, like a writer's one or a podcast one or maybe Catalyst. I'm assuming probably later on and not concurrently, but I don't know about the timing.
Yeah, it'll be interesting. Max had a question in chat earlier about kind of, I think he said he'd done a case study on Code Academy and found talent businesses, especially boot camps, tough to scale. So with such an intensive talent business model, kind of thinking about how OnDeck will be approaching that in the future, having just raised this round and everything, I'm sure it's top of mind for them. Have ever read this about Lambda School too? Yeah.
And I think like ed tech more generally, like I think I've heard, I can't remember if I like where I read it but I think it is, there's more themes of that. So I think it's interesting because you're seeing more and more things now with OnDeck. And I mean, they're raising venture. It seems like there's a potential for like a high growth business. So I mean, just answering your question, I'm really interested in this too.
And when exactly does the program begin? Is it starting up in a few weeks now?
I believe it begins in the summer. I should know. My schedule's all over the place, so I'm waiting for it to show up on my calendar, and then I'm going. I believe it's in a bit though. Like I think applications are still open for people who want to join Catalyst and are not like a part of the founding fellowship yet.
In the Catalyst as a topic, is it sort of a kind of a I don't know what you call it, like a variety catch-all? Is it sort of, you don't necessarily have as much of a topics that like the fintech one has a very topic specific flavor to it, but is Catalyst, is there a topic or is it kind of the more?
Yeah, it's more for people who are like early on in their careers, I guess specifically within tech, but I know, for example, one series that they're doing is like a mentor and mentee session. So they'll bring a mentor and a mentee to talk about what their relationship was like and how both sides optimize that relationship. And specifically on the mentee side, for the people who will be within Catalyst, how do you join a team and do well and form those connections and have them support you throughout your career, even after you leave that position. So things like that can be kind of translated across verticals.
Cool.
Yeah. Well, I see Nitin and Alan here, and they were going to come jam on a startup idea that they're working on with us. And this all seems very relevant. Nitin, I'll let you sort of explain what's on your mind. But it seems like in the space of mentorship, recruiting, finding your people. I know we've talked before about like what's the modern church going to be, where are people going to find their strongest communities. So definitely want to hear from you guys. And then Gaby, if you want to stick around, you're totally welcome. We were just going to sort of have a brainstorm sesh with Alan and Nathan as well.
Cool. I have to hop off in like 5 minutes, but I'm definitely curious to hear what you're working on.
Wow. A good amount of pressure. I love it. I'm gonna wait just 2 seconds. I can see Alan, who's in the same room, is getting up to speed on the platform while he's doing that. This is really cool. What is this highlighter tech? Is this what are we operating on right now?
Yeah, this is highlighter.
This is great. This is this is really wonderful. So great job, highlighter team.
Yes, we'll make sure they see the highlight of you saying that. part of what sorry, I just removed myself to the front row right as you were starting to talk highlighter. So thanks. Yeah, I think the goal of what we're doing here is we just wanted to make a space that we can all get together and make videos together, live stream, and then create highlights. And we sort of see a highlight as like a kind of a new kind of magic moment or atomic unit of information that we want to make available for to be able to float anywhere on the internet, and people can kind of see and discuss and participate. So that's kind of what this is all about. And that latter part is not yet here, but the former part is what we're all doing right now. So get an early peek into how this all evolves.
That's wonderful. Well, just kind of set our intention on this call. Alan and I have been working together in the talent and recruiting business for a short while now. And our hope was just to have an open conversation with folks who have recruited for startups, who have hired talent within their organizations, and get their perspective on like what goes well, what doesn't go well. We're not exactly taking the community aspect that some community strategy that some companies like OnDeck are taking, but can introduce what we're working on, and then would love to ask the group some questions and just have a more free-form dialogue around it. So just to get started, Alan and I are building Enlist. Enlist is a marketplace for recruiters to connect with companies and place candidates into open contingency roles. Taking a step back, we've identified that recruiters end up spending hundreds of hours to build talent relationships with exceptional people. But the nature of the recruiting industry is they end up only placing 5 to 10% of those people into a role that they have developed a client relationship with. The unfortunate element of this is that it leads to extremely poor incentives in the recruiting industry, where recruiters get this really bad rap of being expensive, being pushy, and being extraordinarily volume-centric. When you're only placing 5 to 10% of your candidacy, when someone gets to kind of the finish line of a job, you're really pushing them to get to take that job because that's how you get paid. So where Enlist comes in is we open up a marketplace for companies to post their open contingency roles, and any recruiter on our platform can submit candidates to that role. What we think this can enable in the recruiting marketplace is a scenario where a candidate comes into a recruiter's door, and even if the recruiter doesn't have a direct relationship with a hiring manager or a company that's the right fit for that individual, they can still work as the talent agent with the candidate to get them placed to the right role, coaching them through the interview process to accepting a job, and not exactly worrying about the client side and biz dev side of, do we have the right role available for the individual? So I'll pause there, and really excited to have a conversation about it.
Yeah, so I'll ask a question to kick it off. So it sounds like you have concerns with kind of the way the recruiting business is structured today, and you'd like to improve that. And I think there's probably lots of ways to improve it. So I think it's like a fertile ground to be exploring. I think I would be curious around, who is the customer? Because I think everything aligns around who is the customer and how value gets transferred. And I think a lot of the bad habits and bad behaviors of recruiters are really you can tie the through line to the fact that they get paid in a certain way and they recruit relationships in a certain way and who their customer is. So I think if you want to, shake things up and, create a new structure, I think it may be that you want to change the incentives and the business models and the relationships. And so, one pattern that I would say, I see a lot from early stage companies is, finding, taking some sort of candidate, like let's say, take a pool of actors, some of whom are good actors and some of whom are bad actors, and create tools to help the bad actors become the good actors become more visibly good, and discourage the bad actors from even wanting to participate. And I wonder if that general pattern kind of has applications here, if that fits into what you're thinking about.
So I heard three things, and I'll just explicate them. So who is the customer? What are the incentive structures that need to be shaken up? And then finally, like, how do we create mechanisms for the good actors to become bad actors? The good actors to be elevated, the bad actors to either change their behaviors or not be a part of the platform. I'll quickly start with number 2 because I actually think it's underpinning to 1 and 3. On number 2, what I think Alan and I agree with is the root of the incentive problem is that a recruiter is paid by a company they're recruiting for, and a recruiter only has access to a select few companies. They have access to 5 to 15 roles across 3 to 10 employers. That's an incentive problem because they're now brokering a relationship between the candidate and companies, but only have access to a slim fraction of the companies in the marketplace. So they are extremely pushy when it comes to ensuring the candidate goes to one of those roles. How we think about flipping that incentive structure is we think that if we can get recruiters access to a broad base of open contingency roles, all priced at the same contingency fee, suddenly the incentive of the recruiter is to ensure high conversion, effective placement of a candidate, not not pushing a candidate towards a very, very specific job or pushing a candidate towards a job with the highest contingency fee.
Right, and so the natural, I'm just sort of asking out loud as I think through, but what, are there aspects to the types of companies that typically would use contingency recruiters? Like, is there a selection bias, either positive or negative, in the types of companies that choose to use contingency recruiters, or do you feel like that's not a consideration here?
I think that there is a bias today, and the bias exists primarily around pretty much like cost and effectiveness. So the reason why people, early stage startups will use contingency recruiters because they haven't built out a recruiting team and they don't have the time to spend actually recruiting themselves as, the founders. And they kind of outsource that role. And then once you hit a certain point, maybe you're at like 50 employees. For some companies, it's 100 employees. You realize, wait a minute, it's way too expensive and too ineffective to use contingency recruiters today, or even any sort of external recruiting agency. I should bring this in-house to, absorb the costs. But when you think about it from that perspective, right, it's really becomes a question of cost and effectiveness. And we believe that that's the current bias that exists in the market for companies. And if you're able to solve for both of those, then you actually end up, being able to accumulate a larger portion of the demand of companies. And I think that we kind of view the demand in the market as kind of being really, I guess I want to make the analogy to kind of a real estate market, right? Today, it's almost as if you want to sell your house and you hire a realtor, and now that realtor actually needs to go find individuals that are going to purchase the house, and they only have, their ability to find kind of their own target people, but there's no other agents on the other side helping the demand side. And when you make a real estate transaction, what's interesting is that the seller tends to be paying on both sides, right? The 6% commission is actually coming out of the seller's end. So we have a model where that already happens, but we still have this other agent involved in the process because we think that real estate agents are helpful in helping the other side, right? Helping the buyer as well. And so that's kind of what we think of as if you're able to open up, the doors that you're able to get qualified applicants at a lower cost or an equivalent cost as you have today, then that sort of bias, which is not necessarily a bias as much as a function of the existing market, can kind of go away. You can really increase the demand and achieve some of what Nitin was talking about around just enabling recruiters to really act more as agents for the candidate, where they're going to be compensated no matter where they're able to match.
Yes, it's the idea of helping recruiters function as agents for a candidate. I think is like a super interesting idea. So I think that framing, that sounds like a really interesting idea, because historically recruiters spend all their time developing relationships and kind of spamming people on LinkedIn. And so those are not good behaviors. They're not things that like create value. They're things that sort of help the recruiter prosecute their business, but they don't really if you could sort of simplify that, make it more efficient, I think, everybody would be a fan of that. So, I think there's, yeah, go ahead.
Sorry. One thing on what you just said is that there is a market in the talent industry, even in technology, where recruiters do function as agents. And the exec recruiting space looks actually a lot like this, where when you hire, our understanding is when you hire an exec recruiter on retainer, the retainer is a really cool tool that's going to be used where it ensures that the recruiter gets paid no matter what. So suddenly their incentive is, let's find the right person, let's represent the right individual. And, my incentive as a recruiter is just be a good talent partner, because I'm going to be paid regardless. The problem is it doesn't scale to product management hiring, biz ops hiring, software engineering hiring, which is how we're thinking about that.
Yeah, I would use like this special snowflake analogy because I think it's apt here. And when you talk about real estate, the special snowflake is the house. The house, if you have a special house, all the buyers will show up. It's not really hard to aggregate buyers around a really special snowflake. And if you have kind of a commodity house that nobody really cares about, it's going to be just super painful. You're going to have to resort to all kinds of potentially scammy tactics, right? It's just going to be a hustle. And I think in the case of like talent marketplace type stuff, and I assume we're talking kind of the types of talent marketplaces among talent that we're familiar with, Silicon Valley, knowledge worker, tech-centric starting points. I'd say the special snowflake is not so much the companies as it is the talent. And, the people who are, at the high end of the talent ecosystem have their choice of what they want to work on. And so it's, I think doing things that are in service of the companies or the recruiters that don't very directly map to an idealized customer experience for the special snowflake feels like it could be an uphill battle compared to figuring out how to make sure that like every action and service that you provide, like, can you enable the recruiter to like avoid the bad behavior and focus on curating talent in a new and special and differentiated way? Because if you can free them up from all the drudgery and they don't have to hire associates to go spam LinkedIn, they can actually, maybe they get to host special dinners and maybe they host, I don't even know all of what it might be. But I think if you can it might even not be the same people. It might be the people who consider themselves recruiters today are not actually the recruiters of the future. Maybe it's a totally different profile. Maybe it's an online maker, somebody hosts a video show, or maybe it's somebody who has a great Substack. But I think finding a way to build tools to empower this recruiter, not necessarily to not have to do the BD on the that's probably a nice to have compared to how do you empower the recruiter to really connect with the special snowflake talent?
So this is very top of mind, and one of the reasons we were excited to be on today, we actually when we reached out to Jen, Jen feels like the perfect individual for what the future of recruiting could look like. Where Jen had, my understanding at least, is that Jen has built an exceptional community of really talented individuals, and Jen has has an inside view of that community, and there are individuals there where like that is a differentiated talent pool. And how do we enable people like Jen to help with placement, matching? And so one of the questions that I wanted to pose to this group is like, how do we do that for folks like Jen, for super connectors, for Packy McCormick with his Substack? Like,
right.
How do we enable?
Yeah. Okay. So this I think I get it more now then. So when we say recruiters, we're not talking about the existing recruiters, but we're saying, I would almost say like it almost feels to me like a monetization model of creators. It's maybe, I don't know, maybe.
Just to be explicit, the current product is for the existing recruiting market. This is something that we have stumbled upon that we think is extremely interesting, potentially more interesting, and would love to talk about.
Yeah. And I don't mean to monopolize the conversation, so anybody's welcome to chime in. But yeah, I do think that finding that, I do believe that what you point out, Jen has done a great job of getting a bunch of really amazing talent in the room together. And if you could help be kind of a monetization back end on that kind of stuff, that does seem like, I think I think Jen's doing a great job, but there's also Packy McCormick, and there's other people who have personality and brands and creator curation taste that can help attract that. And maybe if I understand right, then maybe you're a common platform to help those people don't have to focus on developing all these relationships. They can kind of use this as a monetization mechanism around the stuff they're otherwise creating, communities, creating newsletters, creating whatever they're creating that helps gather people and get people together in a common hub. That sounds like a very new and differentiated idea to me.
Yeah, and I just invited Jen up because Jen, the pain points firsthand because people always ask you about this stuff. So if you have stuff to chime in on with as well, go for it.
Hey, I do have a lot of thoughts on this. I don't know how many times people have suggested to me that recruiting would be the best way to monetize Renco. I've always felt weird about the transactional nature of capitalizing on relationships that have always felt very organic. And to me, it feels like it would change the nature of like what's so special about Renaissance Collective, which is that they're real friendships. Just as you wouldn't want to sell your friend on a company just because you're going to get paid by that company if your friend takes a job there. I feel like very protective of the people in Renaissance Collective and aligning well with their interests. I think Charles has some thoughts on this too, because he's one of the people who has suggested that Renco could be a good recruiting business. I feel like that's one thing that we've thought about, bounced around, like internally discussed, but it feels much better to me. Maybe this is just how I'm wired, but like to be an organic connector of people and like know that the value of those relationships on both sides is something that is value that accrues to me too, like making a good connection and building a bridge between two people who should know each other and ought to work together in a non-transactional way is future value, So I'm not sure. What do you think about trying to convince people who are like wired to run communities and not to, place people? That like placement is the thing they should be doing.
Before I jump in, I saw that Nadia unmuted, so I just wanted to make sure that she was going to.
Thanks, Nathan. I mean, I think like so many thoughts. I think there's almost like two problems to solve. Like, I think there's like the matching of like, how do you match like great talent with the role? And I think like thinking about like Jen, your superpowers, like I also think part of it is just really clearly defining the need. Like, I think a lot of tech companies are actually like really bad at this, particularly for executive roles or, you know, product or roles that are, you can't just copy paste a template. It's unique. I think Jen, you were exceptional at this in the early days of Renko, like very clear sense of like who is a smart generalist that people could self-identify with. And then I think you are just exceptional at like pattern matching and like sort of spotting and collecting and like curating and sort of nurturing those people. And I think that is very like non-transactional. It's like sort of a unique like matching superpower. I think like the monetization part is trickier. And I think it's interesting, you know, coming from the chat with Gaby, like I think there's sort of all these different models. There's like the OnDeck sort of, you know, pay for the course. There's like pay a subscription fee, sort of your, you know, pay dues, pay a retainer. But I think effectively adding monetization, like it does, you know, it's hard not to make it more transactional when it's literally a transaction. And so I think that's to me very interesting and very challenging, because how do you do that in a way that doesn't sort of turn this into a very sort of just starkly transactional relationship? So that's sort of what's on my mind.
Totally. And to be clear, I'm not opposed to monetization of a community, but if you know, we're talking about how to monetize, I always think of our community where the customer is the community member and not founders outside the community who are looking to hire a smart generalist. It's great if we can serve our members by making those connections. But I think that within a community, when you run a community, your customer is, you know, the community member.
So that's super interesting, Jen, because I think that, not to sell too much here, but like, when you don't have to have the relationship with the company, right? Do you feel like individuals in the community can come up to you and say, "Hey, Jen, I'm looking for a job. Like, what do you think?" And then you basically do get to act as the agent for your customer, which is the candidate or your community member, and then help them figure out where they want to go with no real obligation on the company side, or, you know, trying to like satisfy the founder, because at the end of the day, it is like transactional in that sense. Like it's not transactional for your relationship with the community member, but it is transactional for your relationship with the client. So you don't care where they end up as long as they are happy.
I kind of see what you're saying, but actually over time, I've wanted out of the middle of these transactions more and more. Like, for instance, what we're seeing in the community is people sharing a ton of great roles. And so this peer-to-peer component of people connecting each other with roles, like, works so well for us that I don't have to broker all these relationships. And that's just a lot better place for me to be. I can think strategically about how to scale the community and how to grow it with quality people and invite them in and have a good onboarding experience and all of these things that I really care about for the, like, that are totally tied to the mechanics of making a community work well, and then let peers broker these sorts of relationships for each other. And I find that that's like the highest quality thing. When I make referrals for people, it's always, like for founders or for community members, it's always got to be double opt-in. And preferably, I want that person to have done a ton of work up front in like looking into the product, really understanding why they want to work on this thing full time, and make me look good in that like referral email that I'm supposed to forward to somebody, so I really expect that somebody else is going to do the work, and I'm not acting the part of the agent. I am acting the part of like, hey, I'm going to forward this on for you. I'm going to put in a good word for you if we have a relationship and I feel comfortable doing so. And then I'm going to get out of the middle.
I feel like the agent is almost the wrong like metaphor. Like I wonder, Jen, if it's more like almost like a dinner party host or something where like you're connecting folks where it's not. I'm trying to think how to explain it because it's like it's not transactional. Like there is value on both sides, but it feels less like there's an expectation of like, I don't know how to explain it. Sorry, that was a half-baked thought. Sorry, Alan.
Not half-baked at all. I would love to talk about maybe examples of these sorts of transactions between people that are made, monetized, but don't feel transactional. Like if we can pull inspiration from other places with a similar dynamic, maybe it's angel investing in friends or whatever. Like how do those other places do it? And then what can we learn from those other interactions?
Could I ask a quick question before I have to go? There is a startup that maybe I'm forgetting the name, but it sounds kind of similar to what you're talking about, and I'm curious your take. And my understanding of it was it's basically like a referral platform for anyone, such that if a company like has a job posting, I see it and I'm like, damn, my friend would be a really great fit for that. I submit them on there, and kind of there's an agreement. I don't know how they do it. That like, yeah, if they do hire my friend, like I get like $5,000 or something like that. And the only way they get access to those candidates is by signing up with this agreement. And I mean, I guess the thesis there, right, is like the best recruiters are your friends or your kind of like colleagues or something like that. I have to hop on a call in a little bit, so I'll come back on. But yeah, I'm curious how that fits into your thesis. And I know we talked about starting out with the job recruiter market to start, and like there's lots of ideas, but I did think that was like a pretty interesting idea, and it does touch on a lot of themes. And it's like, in a way, it's kind of like creating a mechanism which doesn't exist today, right? Like the only way it would happen today is like I go to this company, I'm like, hey, I got a really good person. Like, can you sign a contract that like pays me $5,000? Like, if you agree that you hire him, and I don't know, it seems like a huge friction. So
we agree. We think that referrals are fantastic. Companies quote them as the best source of candidate flow. Our hypothesis here, and would love to be proven wrong, is that candidates want they want a proponent in the job search process. And while I could potentially get an introduction to Cul-de-sac from Jen, to Highlighter from Mishti, and to another company from you, Charles, I could I'm still dealing with a lot of people, and I'm kind of confused through my process. I don't necessarily know how to make decisions at core points. I don't necessarily know how to negotiate my future offers. So the thought is that having a single representative can be valuable for a candidate, but you bring up a good point, which is sometimes the introduction can be made by someone else.
And I guess, and then I'll hop off after this, but I don't know the answer, basically, and maybe the answer is like both, but kind of like, who is better at this matching process? Because I've spoken to some recruiters, I've had some experience. Maybe depends on the person, depends on the industry. Like if you're switching industries, then maybe it's much more helpful. But I can imagine for some people, a recruiter in terms of like the company finding is not very valuable, but maybe the representation is. And then for other people, like actually the company finding is super helpful, and they don't have the ability to kind of go through the referral channel. I mean, the other interesting idea I'm thinking is like, in some ways, if you create the right incentives for someone to find talent, like if you make it that like anyone can recommend someone for $5,000, then actually my incentive is to find people I don't really know that well and like nominate them and recommend them. And it's almost like there's lots of different structures today that are occurring along these lines, like ISAs, right? Like how do I invest in someone's future earnings? And like, I saw a wacky Robin Hanson tweet about this that I'll share with you. That was pretty funny. But it was basically like, how do you create incentives for people to want the success of someone? And so I think that was the other thought around this, right? Which is like, how do you actually just create incentives for me to proactively find people as like an agent, as opposed to, yeah. Anyway, I'm gonna hop, but if you're still on a bit, I'll come back on. But I appreciate it.
Totally. Charles has a really good point there. And it's so funny because I see this dynamic all the time where somebody like Charles will post a role and he'll be like, oh, so many people ask me for a referral to that role. And I think like 95% of them aren't people I'd like to refer, but like 2 are great. And he'll get annoyed and he won't refer the 95%, which is exactly the sort of curation that you want to incentivize. But if Charles knows he's going to get paid out, if he does land a successful candidate, he's going to take as many shots on goal as possible. And you will no longer have Charles doing the curation for you.
So this is a really interesting point and ends up relating to a core product feature or design principle related to a question that David asked before, which is how do you filter bad actors? And how do you promote individuals who are making good referrals or good introductions? Let's just conditional upon the context of the existing product, which is a marketplace for existing recruiters to introduce candidates to companies. Our thought process here was to have like a basic scoring mechanism where it becomes perfectly visible the percentage of, call it, introduced candidates that end up getting a first interview, or the percentage of what is the benchmark for, on average, this many candidates get a first interview across the industry, and then for this individual, like how often are they actually getting their candidates past the application stage into an interview. We think that this builds a virtuous feedback loop where the individuals, the recruiters who are maybe more picky or doing a better job with placements, they get a higher rating. Companies trust them more. When the companies trust them more, they pull their profiles more often. Candidates want to work with agents, recruiters, Charleses who have a higher rating. So you start having this virtuous feedback cycle in the context of recruiters, but would love to hear like how that might be extended to others, or any sort of comments on that sort of.
That makes sense. One of the things, though, is like a scoring system makes sense. That's what I'm reacting to. However, I think in order to make a good match, you really need to know both sides. So you want to know what the founder is really looking for, or the hiring manager is really looking for. And a lot of times I don't have time, or I'm not interested in doing that research very deeply. Like I'm just like, okay, and sometimes I'll send 4 people for a role, and I'll be like, well, if this is a match, great. I'm happy to make the intro. If not, like, no worries, And so I want founders to do, or the hiring managers to do that thought of like matching. I don't want to have to get to know both sides well. That's just like not how I want to spend my time,
I also wonder if and I'm trying to think about how to say this, but like it kind of like, you want to incentivize like good referrals, but it also like, I think almost like takes the onus too much off the hiring manager and like internal company recruiters to like do their jobs well. Because I think like I relate a lot to like the Charles point of view. I've done it both ways. And I think one thing that I found really frustrating as someone referring is when there aren't clear understandings of what they want, or it changes, or the job description is ambiguous, and you refer really great people and they get sucked into this like kind of terrible process that really comes back to like the hiring manager or recruiter weren't clear on what they were looking for. And then it's like that person doesn't get the job, right? But it's like, was it because it was a bad referral? Like, in my opinion, no. I'm biased, obviously. But I think for me, like, it could lead to like a perpetuation of that problem, which I actually think is pretty significant particularly for roles that are like in the C-suite, that are senior leadership, like director plus, like chief of staff, like Jen's calling out, potentially product managers, although I think that does get more templatized now. But I think there's potentially a big issue there.
So we totally agree. It's really tough, and it's something I think that a lot of recruiters have also said is like everything from I just want to get the vibe of the hiring manager to, I actually need to know what they're working on. And one of the most concerning things, honestly, that I heard was like someone expressed, when should I use contingent recruiters? When I'm not sure about what I want, and I just want someone to throw candidates at me so like I can use the candidate pipeline to like figure it out. That to me is like a huge red flag if that's the way that we're, attracting people. Also a red flag for the way they run their recruiting process and organization, but nonetheless, I think that what we've been thinking about are like, what are the key questions that we can ask and how can we really do an extensive intake and then present that to, effectively call it recruiters, call it agents, call it referrers, so that you have that information easily accessible. And I think that we've been thinking a lot about Airbnb in their early days as kind of somewhat of a comparison in multiple ways. The first of which is kind of photos as being the equivalent here of like having a detailed intake. Like I really need to have a good sense of what this role is. And in the other sense, I think, and this is something we're still not sure of, like Jen, I don't know if, for example, like in the Airbnb like version of the story, like you're the person that's like, yeah, I'm willing to have friends stay with me in my house, but I don't want to put, my house just or an extra room in my house available to anyone. Whereas there are other people that, do actually want to monetize this like underutilized asset that they have in the, relationships and build that up as a legitimate side business and a legitimate source of income for them. Because it's like intriguing to them and they want to, monetize those relationships further and do the work that you, I guess, seemingly don't want to do. And I don't mean that at all in a bad way. I just like, you don't want to go like look at a description of a role, like be like, this isn't a good fit for, Alan. Go look at another description of a role, like this isn't a good fit for Alan. Like that's just not what interests you. And what our theory that we're putting out in the world is that, if it's not Jen, is it Nadia? Is it David? Is it Mishti? Is it someone else in the world that does want to do that does want to really be like, I'm going to be this helpful person, and you have this genuine relationship with candidates and help them find, their passion, and do so as a way that I can get money.
Have you guys talked to Julia Lipton?
We have a call with her next week.
Okay.
Which we ask.
She's the exact right person to talk to about this. She was running a community called Awesome People, and I think she turned it into a fund model. It's mostly a fund model right now, but I know she's experimented with monetizing her ability to make connections for people and place people in jobs, and she was doing that. I think you should ask her about it, but like email intros at a cost to, like charging for email intros was one thing that she experimented with. And I'm not sure how those experiments went. So you should ask her about that. But I think one danger is that like you are more responsible to both parties for the outcome of these intros. So you set up an expectation that you're the one managing how this works out for both people, not just making the initial connection. If you're monetizing, on the quality of connection, it's beyond just like making the intro. I do want to like circle back to something that I thought Nadia touched on that was really interesting, and Sarah has touched on it too, the recruiter hiring manager alignment, and also one of the things you guys are thinking about, which is the like how to help hiring managers better express what they're looking for, especially for ambiguous roles, because I've definitely made referrals of great people to people who don't really know what they're looking for. And as Nadia says, that ends up being a terrible candidate experience. And I never feel like referring people to somebody who doesn't know what they want. But more than that, sometimes people don't sell well, and maybe it is that a recruiter or a third party can sometimes sell the role better to a person than a hiring manager can. I'll have people go into something really excited because I've talked to them about the vision, and then they go and talk to the hiring manager and they come out, they're like not excited at all. And there is no good feedback loop to let the hiring manager know that they did an awful job pitching it. And I feel like if you can solve that feedback loop, you would really help improve the candidate experience and get better people in the door.
Totally agree.
Yeah, I was gonna say, it almost sounds like to accomplish that you might need, I mean, there's a bunch of different ways to do it, but because you don't want to be brokering both sides, the relationships too hard, you almost either need to empower people who themselves care to broker it, or you need to be a brand that attracts both sides to broker it. And I think, to be the kind of, the brand, I think there's like I think there's creators would be kind of credible brands, but they have to care about the matches they make. So if you just like gave a widget for a Substack newsletter writer to post at the end of their thing, like, here's a bunch of jobs I get paid if you click, probably not going to be a great experience for anybody. You'll end up getting, kind of an adverse selection bias on both sides. And then I think, but I think there is an opportunity to give, kind of positive selection bias. And I think one model that has approached this in a more specific niche is, are you familiar with TripleByte? Do you know their business?
Relatively, but would love to hear it.
Yeah, so TripleByte has kind of positive selection bias on their brand because they have challenging criteria for being able to be considered as a candidate in the TripleByte network. Like, you have to take a bunch of coding tests, and it's like a pretty rigorous, multi-step process that you have to be like deeply engaged with as a candidate. Now, the promise is we're going to help you as a candidate get access to stuff that you might not otherwise get access to, because we're going to vouch for you because we have seen your actual skills and talent, in the wild, in a sense. And so that promise is not like, hey, we're going to help a Facebook engineer get a job as an Uber engineer. That's just kind of shuffling the deck. But it's like, we're going to help somebody who, maybe in the IT services department of a large insurer get a role at a high growth startup like Uber in engineering. So it's like a very different value prop. It finds a different candidate, and it really tries to sort of find the needle in the haystack and get them connected to amazing opportunities. Now, on the other side, an Uber, the Ubers of the world, or whatever, any, high growth kind of exciting tech company, recognizes that TripleByte does not just let anybody through the front door. They have like a rigorous selection criteria. And so they know there's positive selection bias on the front door, which means that anybody that TripleByte, introduces is going to be, they basically can skip the phone screen process because they're not just out there phishing, spamming LinkedIn. They have a rigorous process on the front end, which means that they actually help accelerate the process on the back end. And those kinds of features in a network help establish and promote and grow the brand of the platform, which then means, there's positive, virtuous cycles that happen to that. So you get more high qualified talent wants to be there. High quality companies want to hire from there. And as long as you kind of keep those balanced well, you can win a bet game, and you can get really big scale on that thing, and you don't end up with the typical stuff we see in the recruiting business. So I think that's a model to consider, but I don't know how it applies necessarily to the candidate sets and companies you're thinking about.
So I think TripleByte's a really interesting case here. And it's also a hyperscale is not good for TripleByte, right? Because by virtue of this positive selection cycle, you actually can't grow too quickly. Otherwise, it dilutes the value of the network. It dilutes the premium value of the TripleByte brand. So I think someone said earlier, it's hard to scale communities. We seem to agree, and we think that there will be lots of communities in the future, lots of individuals, call them recruiters, call them what you want to call them, who have access to extraordinarily high quality pools of talent. We just don't want every one of those every one of those individuals to have to go and form these deep relationships with companies to facilitate the employment and recruiting transaction that, for example, TripleByte has to do. TripleByte has to go and do the biz dev work with all of these companies. I'd really love to talk, if we're okay with shifting the conversation back to what we were talking about before, sure, which is this, like, how do we enable hiring managers to communicate the needs of the role, the qualifications, what they're looking for, who's the right fit, and like why one should be excited about this role? Because something that Alan and I have both observed is that job descriptions are just terrible. And when we pinged a couple CEOs, about why they were so terrible, they're kind of like, we don't really think about it that much. Like, our candidates come in through other sources, so would love, one thing that we're iterating on is how do we do an effective intake? Like, what conversation do we have to have an effective intake? And would love to talk about, the questions to ask, how do we have the conversation, etc.
I think if you think about the things candidates really care about, it's like, what am I going to get out of this job? What sort of stories will I be able to tell people about what I'm doing or the impact I've had? So tell me about that impact that I'm going to be able to, sit around the dinner table and tell people that I have at work. I think that I want to know who I'm going to be working with internally and externally. Like, what are those relationships going to look like? What relationships am I going to build through this role in this opportunity, and how am I going to grow those? I think those are the things that matter to people beyond compensation. It's the storytelling. Am I going to be proud to tell my mom that I do this during the day? Am I going to want to sit around the dinner table with my friends and be like, this is the cool stuff I get to work on? Who am I working on it with? Are these people that I'm going to be able to respect and learn from, So, and job descriptions don't center on those things. They're like,
I forget who. Go ahead, Jen.
Oh no, they're just like, we expect you to bring charisma and, curiosity and passion for adventure, whatever, to the table. And we expect you to work so hard for us. And really, like, the candidate doesn't need to hear that. They need to be sold on what the opportunity is going to offer them, not only now, but in the future.
I was going to jump in. I agree with everything you just said. And I think and I'm trying to remember who came up with this framework, but I think it's like, as a candidate, it's like, are you hiring the role to learn or to earn? And I mean, oftentimes it's some combination of both. It's not binary. It's like a spectrum. And I think there's potentially different personas, right? I think there's the person that's really coming in with a growth mindset. They're tremendously impact oriented. I think in tech, you do also get sort of mercenary personas where they want to work at the next big thing. And that's okay too. And I think those are different pitches potentially. And so I think thinking about who is this person I'm talking to? What do they value? There's sort of different ways. And you can really playbook it. I'm notoriously good at sell calls. I've done many of them, and I've written many JDs and done many interviews. And I think understanding the person I'm talking to, which category can I sort of bucket them into, will affect all right, I'm going to use these 3 bullets instead of those 3 bullets. And it's the same information, but you tweak how you pitch it. And then I think with job descriptions, there's sort of this like Venn diagram of like, what is this person already excellent at? And like, how do I make it really clear? Like, what are the table stakes that like they need to come in knowing how to do? And what are the things that, you know, is exciting? They want to learn. There could be culture. It could be, you know, growth potential. It could be benefits. Like, what are the things that I think are like not things that they have to come in knowing, like the skills and just sort of the hard skills and responsibilities, but the things that I think will excite them. And I think you like want to convey both. And you also want to be really clear about like, what is like the job description, but then like, what are the attributes that someone needs to have already to be successful at that job description, whether it's like a skill, like, you know, needing to know a certain language, needing to know SQL, needing to know something very specific, or an attribute like curiosity, like you are a very good problem solver, you're good in ambiguity. And I feel like a lot of times companies use like fluff language, like you're a rock star, to like mask these things. It's like, no, it actually needs to be like really direct and clear, because otherwise it's this useless thing. You're going to get useless people that don't understand what you're looking for, and then you have to explain it to them.
I wanted to turn Mishti's question around on her and say, what medium do you think is best? Like, we've been thinking about, you know, text is obviously the easiest, but like, is video what you actually need to convey, you know, the emotions of the hiring manager, their general vibe?
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, just kind of thinking out loud, I know that a lot of people are opening up some kind of internal company channels, or like giving external people visibility onto like 1 or 2 Slack channels now. But I'm just thinking, like, what are actual ways that someone on the outside can get a really authentic view into what is going on inside a company? And I think some of these more like either peek over your shoulder, look at your work stream, work process type things are useful, or even live experiences with like, can you sit in on especially since so much stuff is virtual, like, can you sit in on a meeting? Definitely, I think video is better than text for just getting the vibe of someone. And maybe it's not like one-on-one calls, but you have some sort of like open house type conversations. A lot of that seems really missing, and that definitely like the internet is awash in this very cliche language where every generalist role in tech, when I was looking for a job, pretty much sounded the same to me. And I had to do like so many follow-up calls with different people to figure out like, okay, what does BizOps mean to this person? And like, what is this person? It's like, you need hours of research to figure out the most basic information that would allow you to make a yes or no decision on whether to pursue something further.
Yeah, I wonder, it was touched on just briefly here, but I wonder if something in, you know, one of the things that I think we naturally kind of get into these thought patterns. We have these rails that we're trying to sort of form these ideas around. And I wonder if you sort of said like, throw everything out. What, you know, if you were going to blow up the system and kind of just make it work the right way it should, you know, I would make an observation that many companies that are going about a recruiting or hiring process end up roughly doing the same activities again and again. And so one of those, and they may think that they have like a very special process or something that's bespoke about how they do it actually helps them get more knowledge about a candidate. But I would bet that there are lots of common threads around how you can understand somebody. And I wonder if you could use that to help put them on stage. Almost, I mean, I'm imagining almost like demo day for top talent. And so you do like a private Zoom with talent that is interested in a BizOps role or a smart generalist role or whatever. You know, you sort of like create that, and then you create a moment where that happens, and then you put them up on stage, and you know, first you do a private Zoom, do your filtering process, figure it out, then you put them on stage, and you let all the hiring managers around, and you just like interview them. You get them talking, you get them being themselves, and you can ask them tough questions and questions about their background, their interests, what gets them excited. And then it's really up to the hiring managers in the audience to be like, oh, we've got that. We can do that. This is we have the perfect role for you. And here's why what we're doing actually makes sense given what you care about. So treat the candidates as the special snowflakes they are. Because to make this work, I think you really have to be very, you have to be focused on your brand and the brand of people that you have around the table. And so one idea, I'm curious about is, could you actually just take the parts that get redone again and again and again and just flip it into an entirely new ecosystem where you're at the center of a process that you design to serve the candidate as a customer and not to serve the companies as a customer. Like, the companies will show up if you have great candidates. And so what can you actually do that helps candidates? And actually, dovetailing on that, and I'll expand a little bit, is there's an idea that has been, percolating up all over the place. And we find that, it happens in Renco and it happens, outside of Renco. But I think there's a lot of people, the job transition moment is challenging. It can be stressful. And specifically when you're getting to a job offer, it's really hard to understand, like, what are the comps? How should this role be valued? How do I, align all of the offers at the same time? And how do I execute the proper techniques of negotiation to make sure that I get, a kind of a market price on the talent that I'm, selling it to the company. And so I think that there's a lot of advice and help and coaching and nurturing that could happen at that point. And it's, if you think about it, any given candidate's probably not doing that more than once every, 2 years, 4 years, 5 years. It's not a common occurrence, whereas the companies are doing it, a dozen times a week. And so can you really think about how to take the imbalance in kind of knowledge and expertise and habits and patterns, and can you help correct that imbalance by providing a service to the candidates that really empowers people to be on more like equal footing with companies? And that could be, better market comps on what it is. It could be the language you use. It could be how you express what's important to you versus what a company might assume is important to you. So I think there's a lot of features to it. It's not just like a data set. It's like techniques, and it's communication techniques actually. It's supported by data, but it's this other thing too. So I'm just sort of thinking about it because I think systems. Some of the starting points that we've discussed feel like they're like kind of adapting to the world as it is, and I can understand why that's like an attractive starting point. But I also think it's harder to stand out, and there's so much noise in the world that if you can find something that's like a really unique value proposition, and then you come out and you're like the only place where this really unique thing gets done, and then people are like, wow, I didn't know you could have a demo day for talent. That sounds like kind of a bizarre idea, but now that you've done it, it actually makes sense. I wonder if there's something that's like really a rework of the system, not an adaptation of what exists, but like really put your own stamp on what you want to make in the world, and form it around who you want to serve and how you want to serve it. And don't form it around the way the world happens to exist today.
Yeah, I think that a demo day for talent is really interesting. And one of the things that we do in Renco that helps me get to know people really well, and I know companies ask this as an interview question all the time, is teach me something. And so we do these 5 to 10 minutes. They've gotten longer over time because people get so into teach me's that they want to take like not just the 5 minutes we gave them, but the like 15 minutes. And we'll stack a bunch of these teach me's up for a weekend morning, and we'll have people teach us whatever they're passionate about. And if you give people sort of the freedom to teach you anything, you really get to know who they are and what they're passionate about and how they communicate that passion. And I feel like I've really gotten to know who people are. I don't need to like know that they're, a good biz ops manager to know that, the way they approach this thing they're teaching me is methodical and structured, and they're great communicators about it, and they can answer questions well, and so these teach me's have been just like an unlock for us in like getting to know people better. And so when you're talking about demo day, I think be really creative in thinking about how you give people a forum where they feel like they can express themselves well.
Yeah, 100%. Yeah, I mean, if that's what works, just do it. Find those edges. I see some of the comments worried about like scale, and I think like the biggest death or challenge to all startups is saying we need something that scales. And I think Paul Graham is famous for saying, do things that don't scale. I think it's fine to even, I think it's nice to be cautious about your idea. Like, is there some way you could squint and imagine this could be big later? But I think it's more common for startups to get obsessed with like repeatable, scalable processes. And in doing so, you actually end up losing sight of the soul of what you're actually doing. And you end up having no soul but a scalable process. And then you find out that because it's scalable, everybody recognizes scalable and everybody does the same thing. And so you don't really get a chance to differentiate. Whereas when you take some of these techniques, if you ran a Teach Me, there's no recruiter out there who says, the way we do is we run Teach Me's. That's just not a world. Okay, well, it also sounds like it's silly or you're playing or something or having fun. But guess what? People love to have fun. And that attracts great people who like to have fun with you. So it's, like, don't be afraid of the fact that it doesn't sound the way recruiting sounds. Actually lean into those ideas. Figure out how to stick your neck out and be different. Because I think if you're not willing to stick your neck out and be different, you can't accomplish anything.
I really love a lot of what you guys just said, and it has sparked a ton of ideas. But one of the things that I don't know also if we are out of time and should cut off. Mm-hmm. No, my schedule is set till 2, but that was something Nick had put on there. So I'll ask the question anyways. I love the idea of doing reverse demo days and having applicants and like improving the job description process. One of the things that I've really struggled with is, aside from the reason that job descriptions suck, it's kind of a cyclical problem, right? That job descriptions suck in part because we don't hire people through applications because there's so much noise and so many bad, the good people know that they can't apply. Is there anything that comes to mind on basically how to make the application process better? Because I think that's really what we are interested in. The reason why we think recruiters are valuable, aside from the coaching element that they add, is really that they serve as this gatekeeper. You mentioned Jen and Charles, that you guys have people asking you about roles, and you're like, I don't think you're good enough to refer to this role, and that's great. The company wants you to be that filter for them. So I'm curious, how do you make an application where TripleByte has tried to do it with a automated way for software engineering, and it works, but it only works for a very particular small subset of roles. You can't really expand that well. It works much better human to human. And that's kind of, I think, what has excited us the most about the recruiting space is trying to figure out how can we combine what people think of as very effective today, which are referrals, with the actual scalable process of applications, and come up with a hybrid where now you can actually hire people that are not directly in your network, but also, you open it up to everyone, but also not have all this noise and this bad talent getting through. I know I'm throwing basically out there, find me the solution to my startup, but just curious if that sparked any thoughts for people.
Well, I mean, what I would almost say in reaction to that is echoing what David said, which is maybe that's not the right approach, which is the our hiring process has gone through cycles and has convened where it is because we're at a local maximum, right? We can keep iterating on this, but we keep ending up here. And what I heard from David is that hang on, let's not even think about it as an application. Let's not think about the existing hiring process. Let's understand the intention behind hiring, and let's just let's solve for that. And it may look very, very different. And you mentioned the scalable process, but it'll look very different. But that's okay. And in some ways, the delta between how it's done today and how it can be done is done in this world, the greater the delta, the higher likelihood that maybe this is actually different and this could actually work. I've got to jump right now, but the concluding thought for this group, a concluding thought for me is that we've heard this, we've heard a lot of people heed us from going into the hiring and talent market. They quote the dead bodies or the number of failed attempts here. And I think what this conversation has sparked in me, which will be like a deeper question, is like, yeah, like the path, like, you know, the path forward has to be different, because people have tried and have kept trying to, you know, execute on a particular vision of what hiring and recruiting should look like. So really appreciate it for everyone to have shared, you know, what they think that this could look like in a future world, and we're excited to keep people in the loop.
Great. We'd love to follow your process as you go about building and learning, and we're always here to build and learn with you. So let us know if we can ever be helpful as you're thinking about it all.
Yeah, come back on lunch break anytime and jam.
Thanks for having us.
Cool.
Thanks so much.
All right.
Great. Thank you.
Thanks, Nitin.
See ya.
Thanks, Alan.